Hey there, it's Marley. Welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be doing the end of the year book tag. So this tag, it's kind of similar to the mid-year freakout tag, which is a tag most people do on BookTube halfway through the year where you're kind of looking back on your reading, also making some goals for the rest of the year, that kind of thing. This is a tag where you're kind of summing up your whole reading year, making a few, goals for the next year. Quite a few people do this tag. I have been doing it, I think, for every year I've pretty much had my channel. There's a lot of different questions to choose from, and then you just kind of pick which questions you want to answer. So I'll have the list in the description of which questions I answer. Now I am filming this a little bit early. It is November 21st, but I'm going to be starting to upload a bunch of my end of the year content in December. So I do just kind of have to film this a little bit early. I'm also going on a trip out of the country for the last couple weeks of the year. So I just kind of have to film this a little bit early. So unfortunately, this won't encompass my whole reading year, but in reality, I'll probably only read around 10 more books. So let's just get into the tag questions. So the first question is, how many books did you read and did you meet your goal? So at this moment, I have read 88 books and my Goodreads goal is 100 books. So according to Goodreads, I am finally on track to hit my goal of 100 books. This whole year, I've pretty much been 2 or 3 books behind. But honestly, this month in November, I have been reading a little bit quicker than usual and getting through more books. So as of today, with the last book I finished today, I'm now officially on track to hit my goal of 100 books. Next question is, what was your most read genre? This is a pretty upsetting answer for me. My most read genre is romance. 24% of the books I read this year were romance, and I'm upset with that because I consider my favorite genres to be thriller and fantasy. So I don't love that my most read genre is not even one of my favorite genres. I'm really going to be doing some reflecting going into the next year. I really want to change up how I'm reading, how I'm picking my TBRs, because I just don't think this is acceptable to be having romance as my number one genre. No hate to romance, because I do enjoy quite a few romance books, but there's also a lot of romance books I have not liked, and I feel like that is, probably part of the reason why I've been struggling with finding 5 stars this year. It's like the least amount of 5 stars I've ever had, so probably because of this. My next most popular genre is thriller at 19% and then fantasy at 18%. So we definitely got to change that a little bit for next year. Then we have longest and shortest book you've read. So thankfully on your Goodreads stats or like year in review, it will tell you this. The longest book I read this year was Winter by Marissa Meyer. This is the final book in the Lunar Chronicles series. It is definitely quite long. I'm not surprised. It's my longest book. So yeah, I'm definitely happy that I read this, that I finished out a series this year, because I have definitely not been completing or making as much progress in my series that I've started as I would have liked to. But yeah, not surprising that the longest book I read this year was a fantasy book. This is a young adult sci-fi fantasy series. I definitely recommend it if you're fans of fairy tales and the different princesses, because each book follows a different character who is based on a Disney character. So like Cinderella, this one obviously is Snow White, and then we also have Red Riding Hood and Rapunzel, who are main characters in this series. The shortest book I read was Below Zero by Ali Hazelwood. Not surprised this was the shortest, because technically it is a novella in her Steminist novella series. I know that's a bit of an older series, but I just hadn't read this 3rd novella yet, and honestly kind of wish I didn't, because it's going to be on my worst books of the year list. There's going to be a couple spoilers for my worst and best books of the year in this video, I think. But yeah, I really only like the first book in her Steminist novella series. The other 2 I was not a fan of. The next question is, what was your favorite book that was published in 2025? This is a good question because there's definitely some books on my favorites that were not published this year. But looking at the ones that were, I definitely have to shout out Cassandra Clare's book, The Rag Picker King. This is her 2nd book in her Castellan Chronicles series. The first book being Sword Catcher. This is her first adult adult fantasy series, and I've really been enjoying it as someone who's been a fan of her previous YA work. I think if you liked her books when you were a teen, you know, reading about Shadowhunters, I definitely encourage people to give these books a try. I also would recommend this for people who are fans of the Shadow and Bones world, especially Six of Crows. There's a lot of like heists and assassin and like found family kind of stuff going on in these books. So just a note, because I feel like I don't see that many people talk about them. But yeah, this was 5 stars. I loved it. Next is favorite debut novel in 2025. I'm answering this, I think, a little bit differently than what it was intended to be asking. This is basically just my favorite debut that I read this year. And I know it didn't come out this year, but it's just the year I read it. And that was We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kluwer. It's a horror book that was very, very effective. I rated it 4.5 stars. Again, if I read it on a different day, maybe I would have given it that full 5. But it was really, really creepy, very scary, felt like I was watching a horror movie. So I definitely want to recommend it if you haven't read this yet. If you want like a haunted house kind of thing, but also a little bit like out there where you're really questioning like what is going on here. Like it's definitely giving paranormal weirdness. I was definitely impressed with it, and it did live up to the hype. Then we have the question, favorite book not published this year in 2025, and that's going to be Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. I forget the year this was published. 2022. So yeah, a little bit late, but this is of course the sequel to Ninth House. This is one of my favorite series. Definitely liked it more than the Shadow and Bone books I know that I just mentioned. So if you for some reason didn't connect with her Grishaverse series, I still want to recommend this series. It's giving dark academia, it's magical, it has to do with the occult, it takes place at Yale, we have a main character who can see ghosts. It just has so many vibes that I love, and it also has really great found family, really great characters, which I think is what just makes it so top tier for me, is seeing the characters interact, seeing the humor in our main characters. So I'm just loving this series. I think it's continuing. I can't wait when it does. All right, then we have a book that lived up to the hype. I'm gonna say Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Her new releases are always so hyped, but they're honestly always worth it. This one takes place, I think, between like the 60s to the 80s. There's definitely a timeline in the 80s, and we have some female astronauts that are starting to work at NASA. As usual, her books come across like they could be true stories, but they're not. They are fiction, but they definitely draw from different things that are real in our reality. So we have our main character, I think her name was Joan. Did I remember that correctly? Joan, and she's just always loved space, and we're seeing her journey getting into NASA, some friendships, some different relationships she has with the fellow astronauts, and we know that there is going to be this accident that happens. It can definitely be emotional. It's definitely a beautiful story. There's definitely still romance in here. It was a really nice romance actually, so definitely lived up to the hype. Another one I want to mention that lived up to the hype is Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanaugh. This is a thriller I was hearing so much about, and I had really high hopes, and it was a 5-star read for me. I was in a 5-star drought at the time, and it was just so great to actually read a good thriller, a good book that had great twists. So for any thriller fans out there, this is a must read. Then of course we have to counter that question, any book that did not live up to the hype. For me, that's gonna be If I Never Met You by Mary McFarlane. I mean, she's not super hyped up as an author, but I feel like I've just seen so many of her romance books and heard some good things that I thought she would be a romance author for me. But this was really a dud. Even though I had multiple of her books on my TBR, I'm gonna have to go onto Goodreads and honestly just remove them at this point. Like, this is an example of a romance just disappointing me, and so I need to stop picking up so much romance. But yeah, this is an author I've discovered was not for me. I read it earlier in the year, so I feel like I don't remember like a ton of detail, but this definitely disappointed. Another book that didn't live up to the hype for me was Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. I've loved like so much of her rom-com books. I know it's ironic because I just said I didn't like her one novella, but for the most part I've enjoyed her writing and I connect with it. But this was her diving into like a less comedic story, more like darker and emotional, and it didn't work for me. She introduced having a male point of view in this romance, which normally she doesn't have. I also just tend to dislike when we have the male point of view in hetero romances. Like, there was just a lot working against this book, so unfortunately it did not live up to the hype, but I'm glad so many other people are liking it. Next up, we have a book that felt like the biggest accomplishment. One of the books I'll say for this is Bunny by Mona Awad. Not that this was a particularly long book. I feel like normally I would say like a long book for this because it felt like an accomplishment. But I think just because I've been hearing so much about this book since I started on BookTube, it's a favorite book of some of my favorite booktubers like Books and Lala. So I was definitely happy to have finally read this and finally understand what so many people are talking about. Unfortunately, I didn't love it as much as some people, but I did find that it was kind of lingering with me. Like some of these books, you know, you forget about them pretty quick, but this one I actually felt like it was staying with me. So that has to mean something. And then since I have the book out already, I'll also just mention Winter, kind of similar to what I said earlier because it is such a long book and because it finished off a series for me that I've been reading for years. So this also was definitely a good accomplishment. Then we have your favorite new character. So for this one, I'm gonna say a character from Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This is like a fantasy romance book that I had really high hopes for. Unfortunately, I ended up finding that a side character in this book ended up standing out a lot more than the main couple, and that was Silas the demon. I felt like he had a really good arc in this story. Again, he just really stood out, and reading other reviews, I think a lot of people feel the same, that he was just kind of the MVP of the book. So I'm gonna mention him. We love a demon that actually has like a softer side to them, a redemption. So yeah, he's probably the most memorable thing about this book. Of course, I do also want to mention Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I think a lot of the characters from this book also stand out, but especially Maisie. I know a lot of people have talked about her, and I'm just gonna jump on the bandwagon. Also, I think she was such a standout character, definitely my favorite in this book, and I'm looking forward to seeing the movie. The trailer just dropped, which also is like so early to drop the trailer. Let me know if you guys watched it. It looks really intense. I was literally tearing up. Yeah, Maisie is a great character. Then of course, least favorite character is the next question. So I'm gonna say the dad from We Used to Live Here. I already mentioned that book, but this character was really annoying and definitely kind of like the antagonist of the book. I also just want to say like almost all men in the My Brilliant Friend series. This is like a historical Italian series. I read the first 2 books this year. I'm definitely going to continue, even though it's like not my typical kind of book that I would read. It's about this friendship between these 2 girls starting in, I don't know, like the 50s or something, as young girls, and then they're growing up. It's just terrible to watch like what women had to experience during this time. A lot of the times from the hands of men, their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, and so I'm just gonna say men in general from this series. Ooh, another one actually. I'm gonna say the sister. If we're going to talk about a female character, the sister in this book was so irritating, very annoying. I guess you can kind of understand her. Like Taylor Jenkins Reid writes characters that, yeah, like you understand, but you also hate. Ooh, and then a really recent one, I haven't even fully, oh no, I guess I did feature this video recently on my channel. In Fangirl Down, Wells, which is the main guy, like the hero of this romance, I really hated his character. He was giving not fully abusive vibes, but kind of like controlling, possessive. Also like baby, like why don't you grow up and be like able to regulate your emotions on your own without the girl having to do it for you. Anyways, I just really disliked him, and in a romance, obviously it's important to like the hero, so that really sucked. Okay, let's move on from this question. Then we have the most shocking moment in a book. So I want to mention Kill for Me, Kill for You again. As I said before, I feel like this had a lot of twists, a lot of action, and definitely surprised me. One of the twists, I did have a feeling earlier in the book, but then it kind of convinced me that it wasn't going to be that twist. So in a way, it was surprising, but in a way, I guessed it. Then I also want to mention the book I just finished today before I started filming this, and that's Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. I've been hearing about this thriller for so many years on BookTube, people saying it has this huge twist. I also heard a little bit of detail about what the twist would be. So I was reading it, I was kind of picking up on what, you know, Pinborough was laying down. I felt like I had it figured out, and it did actually shock me at the end. It did get me with a little twist, and so I gotta mention it, I gotta shout it out, because despite me feeling like I knew what was going on the whole time, it did get me. Also, just kind of in general, the book Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead, I really had no idea what this book is going to be going into it. Based on people's reviews, I just didn't really get a sense of the plot or the vibe. So reading this whole book was quite surprising for me. It's like a dark romance. There's thrillery, mystery vibes in it. It's just a pretty weird book. So I think it will definitely be a little bit surprising for whoever picks it up. Next question is favorite couple or OTP. I kind of feel like I mentioned this in the mid-year review tag already, but I really liked The Couple in the Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. This is one of the better romances I read this year. So if you were turned off by this author duo for some reason, I know they've definitely had some misses, I would check this one out. This one's actually good. It has enemies to lovers and it has fake dating. Actually, not really enemies to lovers, but it has fake dating, which is one of my favorite tropes, that forced proximity. I actually liked the main guy in this book and it was actually really funny and really fun. So I want to mention them. And then even though they did not get very good moments or scenes in this book and I'm feeling kind of heartbroken about it, I still have to mention my OTP, Bree and Selwyn from the Legendborn series. Book 2 was their book, okay? That's when I loved it and I gave it 5 stars. I gave this book 4 stars for multiple reasons, but I mean, one of the reasons that was disappointing is that Selwyn wasn't really in this book very much, and then what ended up happening was pretty upsetting as a Bree Selwyn shipper. But you know, I still want to shout them out because I still love them. I still have hope. The next question is the best written book you read this year. It's hard to say because I feel like I don't always rate just based on like what was best written. But one that I finished recently is Hidden Valley Road by, what is his name? Robert Kolker or something. It'll be on the screen, but this was a nonfiction book I read about this American family. I think the book kind of starts out in the 40s up to present day, but basically this family, they had 12 kids and then the parents, and 6 of the kids ended up having schizophrenia, being diagnosed with schizophrenia. So it was a really interesting look at this family dynamic, the history of the family, and then also the history of this mental disorder. So if you are interested in schizophrenia at all, I would recommend it. I think the author did a really good job of piecing together all this history of the family. It definitely was hard to keep track of all of these characters because 10 of the 12 kids were boys and they did blend in together a little bit, but I think he did the best he could. And he also was like putting in details of just kind of the general research and stuff going on in the mental health community during all these years and the different research that was going on, the experiments, medications that were being prescribed. I think it was very well done. I don't know why I also kind of want to mention the favorites for this by Lane Fargo. I know some people did not like this book in my book club. Maybe I shouldn't be saying it for this question of best written, but I do just kind of want to shout out this book because I think I had such a fun time reading this. It's a Wuthering Heights like retelling, lightly based off of it, but it has to do with like a figure skating couple and their rise to fame. It was giving Taylor Jenkins Reid vibes of dealing with this kind of like famous athlete duo and the drama surrounding it, but it was way like messier. There's so much drama. I was living for the tea of it all. So I'll just shout that book out too. The book that you pushed the most people to read this year, I really struggled to answer this. One I might say is Project Hail Mary, just because I think I helped to influence a friend of mine to pick it up a little bit. Actually, maybe multiple friends of mine now that I'm thinking, I'm not sure. This was also a surprising read. Maybe I should say this for the best written actually. This is really well written where like it might come across as daunting because you see it's a sci-fi and it's like a bit long and it's about this man who's up in space and he's doing a lot of sciencey stuff, but despite that feeling intimidating, it actually was so consumable, easy to read, easy to understand for the most part, very heartwarming, just such an overall well-rounded great book that you definitely need to read before the movie comes out next year. Next is favorite book cover of the year. I know I've mentioned this book cover a lot on my channel, but I'll just say Study in Drowning. I finally read it this year. I finally do understand the hype for this series in Ava Reid. I really enjoyed it and want to read more from her. But yeah, it has this really nice cover. It has the books from the library on the sprayed edges there, and then yeah, I feel like the front is also really pretty. And then I also got the sequel that came out, Theory of Dreaming. I'll take off this sticker so you can see the full cover. But once again, it has a really beautiful cover. It has the same edges, so it kind of matches. And then yeah, a nice, pretty cover again. So I'll just say this duology. Ooh, and I like the spine too, actually. I don't think it's focusing really, but. Next question is favorite adaptation. So I quite liked the We Were Liars TV show adaptation. I know some people didn't. I read this book in 2020, so, you know, I'd had some distance from it. I did rate the book 5 stars though. So I did love the story going into it, but I didn't remember all the details. And that's how I prefer to watch adaptations now, is to just have that distance. So for me, I was watching it, I was enjoying it, waiting to see how they would do kind of the twist at the end. And I do feel like it was overall pretty well done. Some of the acting here and there could have been better, but was nice to see. I think his name is Joseph Zaffa or something like that, who's going to be young Hamish. He was great, and yeah, I did overall think they did a good job with the show. Another show I love, I didn't read the source material, but My Life with the Walter Boys. I do really love that show and think they're doing a good job with that. If you want like a teen drama romance show, you should definitely look at that one. And then I also, again, I did not read the source material, but I did watch the Lord of the Rings movies for the first time recently. So I would say the third movie, Return of the King, was such a solid movie. I had my issues with the first two, but the third one was really great. Obviously so action-packed, and you really cared and felt like scared for the characters, and it was emotional and very beautiful. So I'll mention that too. What book made you cry the most? I was struggling to think of something, but I know I got emotional in Not Quite Dead Yet by Holly Jackson, which might seem weird because this is a thriller. And so it definitely has the thrills and the mystery that you want from a thriller, the twists, but it was surprisingly emotional at the end. And so that is something I do really like in thrillers, is when there's also this emotional undertone, this connection you have to the characters. Maybe there's a romance or some other relationship that's really developed well. So I'm going to say this one for that. What book made you laugh the most? I think a really charming book is A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. I didn't end up loving this book as much as I thought, but it is quite funny, the banter between the characters. It's like a cozy mystery historical book, but also quite focused on the romantic connection between our two main characters. I also was really pleasantly surprised by The Wedding People. I thought this book would be more emotional based on the premise of the book, which is about a main character who is deeply depressed, and then she ends up going to a hotel where this wedding is going on. I'm sure you've heard of it, it's very popular. And then she ends up like bonding with the bride. It's kind of like an inspirational story, but I didn't realize how lighthearted it would feel, how funny it would be. I've said this before, but it gave me like British humor vibes, even though it's not British, but it just really worked for me, and I think a lot of other people. And if you want a little pick-me-up story, I would recommend this one. A new favorite author you discovered this year? I feel like a lot of the favorite books that I read were from authors I already knew, but as I mentioned before, this was my first Ava Reid book, Study in Drowning, so there's definitely potential for her to be a favorite, but I did only read one of her books, so feels weird calling her a favorite. Speaking of favorite, Blaine Fargo, we could also say her, but again, I've only read one of her books. So there wasn't really any new author where I read multiple books, but there's a few where I liked their one book. Guilty pleasure read of the year. I feel like I mentioned this in my mid-year freak out tag, but Magnolia Parks by Tessa Hastings, one of those. This is definitely like a drama, exaggerated romance book about these really rich people, a lot of miscommunication and like silly drama between them. I mean, Gossip Girl vibes, that kind of thing. So it's really something you can only say as like a guilty pleasure, but it just really worked for me, and this is a series I need to continue. Then more of a loaded question, were you happy with your reading this year, and what will you do differently next year? As I alluded to at the top of the video, no, I was not fully happy with my reading this year. First of all, I feel like I didn't read enough books. Now it's seeming like I'm on track to hit 100 books, but honestly, I don't even know if I will because of the travel I'm doing. Like, will I stay on track with my goal? I'm not sure. But on top of that, I didn't have enough 5 stars or highly rated books. And so even despite doing some video challenges where I was trying to find 5-star reads, like it wasn't really working for me. So I am going to be doing a 5-star audit next year. I've seen other booktubers do this, where you really kind of analyze the books you have given 5 stars and then basically I'm just going to try to read more books similar to those. So one of the first things I'll do, reading less romance, reading more of my preferred genres, which are fantasy and thriller. As you've seen, I've mentioned, a few different fantasy and thriller books as my favorite books. So I really need to pick up more of those and less romance. And hopefully that will also lead me to just read more books overall as well if I'm enjoying the books I'm reading. Then we have what's the best nonfiction you read this year? I'm going to say Hidden Valley Road, which I already mentioned. I actually did read multiple nonfiction books this year, which I'm happy about. A number of them were just recently in November, but a few of them I didn't quite love. So this was definitely the best one. And I look forward to reading more nonfiction next year as well. That's going to be one of my goals. Favorite video that you made in 2025? So something I started doing in 2025 was doing little free library vlogs. I did a number of them, and I can leave a playlist to them down below or just go visit my channel. I really enjoyed doing those vlogs, even though they weren't that successful. I had a fun time with it, and they did get quite a lot of views this year, so I'm happy about that. Another vlog that I enjoyed doing, or I'm happy that I did, was my type 1 diabetes reading vlog, which I just uploaded in November for National Diabetes Awareness Month. I read 3 books that had type 1 characters and just gave my review of the books, but also my review of the representation of type 1 diabetes, if I thought it was good or not. Unfortunately, that video is really flopping because I know that's a pretty niche video to do. But if you haven't watched it yet, go check it out. Also, earlier in the year, I did this video that I thought was a bit creative where I colored pages based on the books I was reading. Earlier in the year, I was really into coloring with, alcohol markers and those really cute coloring books. And basically, I did a video where I colored pages based on the books I was reading. I did Onyx Storm for one of them. So that was fun, and I feel like that was more a creative video. So getting more into next year, basically what's a book that you didn't get to this year that you need to next year? And it's pretty ironic because literally last year's tag video, end of the year tag, I said Sarah Hogel, Old Flames, New Fortunes. And once again, I'm going to say it because I didn't pick this up this year. Even though I picked up all these different romance books, I didn't pick up this one from one of my favorite romance authors. So I'm going to say it again for this year. I would really like to get to it next year. I also want to mention another book I already showed, Theory of Dreaming by Ava Reid. This is the sequel to Study in Drowning. So I'd love to read it before I kind of forget the first book. I want to try to be better about keeping up with series. So this is one. Another thing I want to prioritize is Rachel Harrison. She's an author I have a lot of faith in. I've enjoyed 2 of her books so far, and I've bought 2 more. That's these ones for my TBR. So I would love to actually read these. She's an author I feel like I'm actually going to really enjoy. So hopefully this will help with my reading goals for next year. And the last question I'm going to mention here is the book you're most anticipating for 2026. So I'm going to list a couple. There's Everyone in This Bank is a Thief by Benjamin Stevenson. This is a series I've been loving. I gave the first book 4.5, the second book 5 stars. It's about this character who writes. He's like an author. He writes how to write mysteries, and then he ends up getting involved in these real life mysteries. It's just such a creative series. It's giving me that thriller mystery vibe, but then also comedic. So I really love that. Then of course we have The Last Fairy King by Cassandra Clare. Cassandra Clare is one of my favorite authors, and I love her Shadowhunter books. She took a little break from writing Shadowhunters, which I think was needed, but this is supposed to be the first book in her final Shadowhunter series. So I'm so excited. We're going back to some characters we've seen before, but now they're older. So I'm really pumped for this, and I'm definitely going to be doing a reading blog for this. And lastly, I'll just mention The Caretaker by Marcus Kluwer. I mentioned him earlier in this video. I really liked his debut, so I'll definitely be reading his next horror book. I don't know anything about this one, but I have faith in him being really creepy and scaring me in this book. So I look forward to reading that too. So that's going to be the end of the year book tag. Let me know any of your thoughts below, and let me know how many books you've read this year and if you are on track for your goals. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you've not already. I'm going to be doing more end of year content, best and worst of the year and that kind of stuff. So hope to see you there. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.